Welcome to another Thursday with Third Path Live podcast. On every episode, you will meet thought leaders, role models, and change agents connected to the Third Path community. All season long, we are exploring why the new ideal employee is someone just like you, someone who wants to integrate work and life. And if you are inspired by what you hear today, please share our podcast with some you know and join us again next month. Very shortly, I'll be introducing today's special guests. But before I do that, let me provide a big picture about what we'll be discussing today. So as you can see, we've had our 6th biennial summit. It happened last week. It was amazing to bring the community together again. We haven't been able to be in the same room since 2019. And as we've all learned in hybrid and remote situations, getting everybody into the same room makes a huge difference. And we'll be talking about that a little bit today. So what did we learn? We really learned that we are innovators and that we're at a very interesting moment in time. There is a lot we need to learn about creating hybrid and remote workplaces to have them function well. And by the time we get together again in 2 more years, we'll be learning a lot about 32-hour work week and 4-day work week organizations. So there's a lot we need to learn. But we've also learned that we have experts in our community we can lean on and learn from as we create these amazing, new, innovative workplaces, hybrid, remote, 32-hour work week, or 4-day work weeks. And that their expertise we've seen comes from a long-term commitment to their own work-life integration journey. So it's not a coincidence that the Third Path community has quite a bit of knowledge about how to do this future innovation very well. Today, we've got 3 people who will be helping us with this conversation. We have Sharon Blackborow. She's going to be talking about onboarding and talent development in a hybrid workplace. Sharon leads a team focused on organizational health, team vitality, and individual growth. So you can tell she'll bring a lot to this conversation. Anna Scott will be talking about managing people and workflow in a hybrid workplace. And Anna is a strategy and operations manager with an international consulting firm based in Seattle. Anna also brings lots of expertise about how she's played this out in her own life, and I know she'll be able to tap both personal and professional experiences around these topics she's going to be talking about. And we're really excited to have Rashi, Shyam join us again. She is going to be talking about how hybrid helps advance DEI goals, and she is the Director of Digital Transformation for the Partnership, Inc., and brings a passion and expertise around DEIB and remote work. So as you can see, we've got, like I said, in the Third Path community, a lot of talent we can lean on and learn from. After we hear from our guests today, the big topic we'll also get to is the importance of creating a culture of connection. There's a lot of people who are worried that hybrid work or remote work somehow is going to pull apart culture in organizations. But we believe done well and done through connection, you can really reinforce a strong culture through hybrid and remote work. And that it's going to be many different ways you need to approach doing this. We'll be talking about these a little bit, but just to mention a few, it's getting smart about onboarding. And again, we're going to hear Sharon talk about that. It's being created and planned ongoing connection. There's ways that you can make it very intentional for people to learn about each other and connect easily. Simple things like virtual office hours or employee profiles that people can look up and learn about somebody and make it really accessible for the whole organization to know who's there and what they're excited about at work and in their lives outside of work. We also learned to create a culture of connection, you have to balance creating focused work time and what I call smart meetings. One of the big problems we've learned is that your day can get caught up in too many meetings, and we need to get smart about how we run our meetings, and we need to make sure we still give people lots of focused work time. And in those meetings, then getting smart about how to really build in connection time. There's other ideas about how we can connect people who don't regularly connect, and most importantly, figure out routine ways to create in-person experiences. So these are all things that we're going to talk about after we've heard from our experts on their topic areas. We're going to come back to this concept of creating a culture of connection. Most importantly, we really can't create a culture of connection if you're not investing time and resources to make this happen. So these are some ideas that we'll come back to in a little bit after we've heard from our experts. All right, so let's hear from our guests today. I'm really excited to have all of you here, really wonderful. Each of you could probably speak about some of these different topics we've already surfaced today, but I'm in particular going to start with having Sharon talk about the importance of doing onboarding well and how it's connected to talent development in a hybrid workplace. So welcome, Sharon. Clearly, the background you bring and the work you're doing helps you have a lot of probably expertise and nimbleness around this idea. So tell us a little bit about what you've been learning around onboarding and talent development in a hybrid workplace.
Yes, so this is a topic near and dear to my heart. So I lead up a talent, learning, and organization effectiveness group for a large hospital system in Virginia. And so you can imagine the idea of hybrid and remote employees is quite different for a hospital system that has a relatively local footprint, even though it's a large player. So when we had the opportunity to move a lot of things remote in through the pandemic and in COVID, it first started as a crisis move, but then we saw so many benefits. So onboarding being one of the biggest. So what we used to do is bring people in for their first day, the whole day in person. So you can imagine how much that limits our talent pool. You can imagine the burden. I love that we're going to be talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So in healthcare, you'll be surprised that many people live below the living wage. And so to ask them to travel in for a full day of onboarding is in itself an equity issue. And what we also found is that what we're really after is helping this large system feel like a system. So we want people to feel like they're part of Inova. So we moved and kept our onboarding program completely virtual. This was culture shaking for our organization. We love it though, because one, our CEO and president gets to show up every single week because he can do it from anywhere. And that is an amazing way to kick off and get people excited about being part of the organization that they're in. And then we found that we were able to make it very truncated and also persona based. So we have everybody go through something for 2.5 hours, and then you sort of go off into your specialty areas. So instead of sitting through a day-long thing that maybe only 20% of the onboarding information that matters to you is being presented, you really get what's very targeted to you, which also really helps kick off this employee engagement very quickly because we're immediately recognizing you as an individual and your individual needs. From a team perspective, we've created quite a few tools that really help our leaders onboard people from 30, 60, 90, and all the way into the first year. So we're working on how do we really strengthen the manager and team member relationship through those critical times through targeted conversations. So those can happen virtual, in person, right? They sort of span. And from a learning perspective, we give our managers sort of like do you have a hybrid team? Like, here's how you might do this a little different, because building trust across the wires is a little bit different, right? So you want to make sure that you spend a lot of time around connection, that you spend a lot of time in focusing on relationship before you go to the task. So it really helps to know people in order to trust them and get the work done. The other thing that I really love that we've put as part of our onboarding process, and this is something that I have used in my own personal management my whole life, because a leader used it with me, is called the How Do I Want to Be Coached tool. And really, it's a list of questions that a manager uses with their new team member to say, tell me about how you like to receive feedback. Tell me about something that's really important to you. Tell me about what will really be a hot button for you. Tell me about how you like to receive recognition. And so it's really this way that you get to immediately know your person on a deeper level. And that is particularly important in hybrid relationships where you're seeing each other less, and that connective tissue of like the hallway conversations and the drive-bys aren't there. So you really recreate them in a more structured way.
Wow, I already feel smarter, and I just need to drill down on every single thing you just said, Sharon. That's fabulous. First off, something obvious as people are listening in that's worth underscoring. So a hospital's a great example. We think hospital, you got to physically be there. But it sounds like what happened is you learned what we've been teaching for 23 years. Some jobs do have to physically be there, and some jobs don't. And you have learned a lot about how to educate everybody in the organization about that truth and find the opportunity of hybrid for those who have that opportunity. What were some was there any expected learnings about who could do hybrid from the pandemic?
Yeah, so we created quite a few clinical roles that you would be very surprised that we're able to migrate to virtual. I was just rounding with a urology group last week. So you think urology of all things, nothing can be online in urology. But they got really smart about when can they do online visits, and it really freed up their providers to be strategic about when do they need to be in person with a patient. And because they're building the relationship sort of both ways, it allows them to sort of nudge the patient to when actually an online visit is most optimal for their team. So this hybrid approach is so beautiful, right? Because it has, but I think can really have the best of both worlds. Now, I'll tell you what the office manager told us is it was not easy for the providers to move. And because this is the thing, right? I think particularly what I've noticed in clinical is they have to take like a leap of faith. They sort of have to pilot it and try it because it's so unique to what they're used to and how they've been taught. So I'm sure that's not unique to healthcare, that many groups need a little bit of a pilot. So I always think about like, what's the smallest experiment you can run and just sort of get people comfortable.
And what you're describing is something we really saw at the summit is once people did that and they tried it out, that actual real-time experience really helped bolster the commitment to hybrid. And so it's like getting them over a little bit of some of those fears into an actual experience helps, a positive experience helps keep the commitment going with hybrid. I love that we had you talk about onboarding because, what a great list of ways you made onboarding better by having it be hybrid. Just the idea that you could have everyone together and then break them apart into their specialized areas. What a great solution that's so much easier in hybrid. Tell us more about this idea of the 30, 60, 90, 1 year experience, because again, it is building trust and connection over time. We're hearing that as a common and important thread in onboarding, probably no matter whether you do it on-site or hybrid, but especially important as you're making use of hybrid. Tell us more about that, Sharon.
Yeah, so those are critical times in your first year where you're likely to see some turnover. So they're critical times to be checking in on your people. Within the first 2 weeks, 4 weeks, you're wanting to make sure that they just have their basic needs, right? If you go up sort of like the hierarchy of needs. And that's what these guides really help do. And then at the 60-day, you're sort of making sure, do they know what's expected of them? Do they have the tools and resources, right? Anybody who's familiar with the Gallup Q12 12, I think, will know what I'm referring to. So, and then, 90 days is really when somebody is sort of deciding, are they with you or are they not? And in a market can be very hot. And especially if you think about, we're dealing with nurses who can go find a job tomorrow, like they can take one today and go find one tomorrow. We need to make sure that they are really happy all the way through that first year. The other thing I will say is those are the critical big points for managers. So we always say, like, if you do nothing else, like we like to say, like, if you do nothing else, this is what you need to do. But here's like actually what it really looks like. Well done. Well done. You're checking in, particularly with hybrid teams, they're bringing them together monthly or at the bare minimum quarterly, right? People are getting to see each other and connect in person. And then what we see is that a lot of teams get together for something very social about once a week. So my team meets 9:00 every Friday, and it's our coffee talk, and there is no work talk. It is like, how's your family? How's your stuff? Right? Like, we're sort of recreating all of that, and that really helps bring that in. I think the difference when you lead a hybrid team or when you are a hybrid team member is those moments have to be so intentional because you're never going to run in. So what we try to drill into our leaders who are leaders of hybrid teams is you can't leave this up to chance like you would have when people are in person. You have to be so intentional about creating these moments.
Yeah, all of them, such good examples that we're going to come back to. I'm really glad you're priming the pump with how to really build strong connections in a hybrid workplace. And I'm just going to underscore one last thing that she said, and then we're going to go on and hear from Anna. Focus on relationships before tasks. I love that phrase. And it is the building of relationships that actually helps us do the tasks better. And so good that you're helping managers learn the importance of that. Wonderful for you. So many good tips. Wonderful, wonderful. Not that we couldn't hear more from Sharon on that exact topic, but I wanted to give a well-rounded view of some of the things that we looked at the summit. A whole group of people in the room together, all pioneers thinking about these issues. It was really quite energizing. And of course, an important ingredient when you're trying to live an integrated life is how much work can you take on when you're also trying to have time and energy for your other life responsibilities. So Anna, you've been a role model and change agent around these exact issues of managing people and workflow in a hybrid workplace. What are some tips that you have for people around what you've learned to do this so well?
Yeah, well, I think Sharon set me up really well for this because I think it really builds upon that. I think that relationships before tasks is absolutely important, and really, as a manager and leader, I think understanding each individual as a human and really kind of leading with empathy unlocks a whole lot. I think what I've learned and what I try to practice is. I like the coaching, how do I want to be coached? I do a little bit of that informally of just really trying to understand how do you like to receive feedback? How do you like to interact? What does accountability look like? All of those really important aspects of ensuring that a team is high functioning and each individual feels that connectedness and belonging. So just at an individual level, leading with empathy, I really try to listen more than I talk. And I think that there's also, when it comes to hybrid work and some of the tricks and challenges, sometimes we have to be firm, but also compassionate. In my world of consulting, it's an interesting world where I have a team who report up to me, but I often don't work directly with them. Typically, we have project teams comprised of individuals, and in the past, we'd all go into work and work as a team there. And so we've had to evolve that to it truly is hybrid, and they're going to be each project is going to be a different hybrid situation from the one before it. So we have to really be flexible and adaptable, and our role as leaders is to both model that and help folks through that, because it's not always easy. So I think supporting the journey is hugely important in making sure that connection and sense of belonging remains. And that has to be all in place in order to establish the workflow and establish how do we get tasks done, how do we get work done, how do we work together on a daily basis. So from a tactical level, we definitely have structures in place that allow us to kick projects off, establish like how we best communicate, how often do we need to check in, when are we in person versus remote, and really creating space and allowing for flexibility in all of that. So sounds very fluid, and it is, but we seem to have figured out how to make it work and support individuals along the way.
I know a little bit about your story, and I think one of the things people are probably hearing is that, because of the project nature of your work, and you've gotten very good at kind of saying, okay, here's the team for this project. Let's articulate right at the start how we're going to work together. What are some things we need to keep in mind personally and work-wise to make this project work well? Tell us a little bit about the start of that with the team. What does that look like? What kind of conversations are you having to help that integrated approach get started right at the beginning?
Yeah, we absolutely take time at the beginning of each project, and I'm actually kicking one off next week. So I've been really focused on that this week of how to bring the team together. So we really start by looking at what is the scope of this project, what is everyone's roles and responsibilities, who are the other people involved, and how will we work with them, and just try to get that buttoned up as early as possible. We also really focus on the outcomes and goals so that we're aligned and really making sure that we're heading towards the same direction. We also spend quite a bit of time really focused on that. How do we each work best? So high performing teams is a construct that we use, and we'll just create in PowerPoint a slide that has all the information about what's the best way to contact me? What are my working hours? What might you need to know that's going on in my personal life? Do I have childcare pickup that I need to worry about? Is my commute horrible? So I may be a little resistant. We use DISC as a working style construct, so we know what our working styles are and how best to communicate with each other. So we really try to be holistic in that, getting to know you at the project level.
Yeah, and I've always admired that, because I think that kind of transparency, both about work styles, life, all of the above, and making that normative and comfortable and setting that tone right from the start means that, work and life keep on shifting over the course of our lives. So it's created a space for that to be normative and continue the conversation as time goes on and the project continues. So I think you've done an exemplar way of really launching a group to feel comfortable that they are whole people and they're going to do their best jobs being respected as whole people at work. How do you help people, and you might not even have an answer for this one, Anna, but the $1,000 question, and we might come back to it more at the end. How do you get a sense of whether people have the right amount of work? Have you learned any tricks around how workload is feeling in a hybrid situation?
Still a work in progress for sure, but it, I frankly, each week I just ask, what's your capacity? Like, do you feel like you've got enough to keep you busy, or gosh, that seems like you've got a lot going on? Are you going to be okay? Do you need support? Do we need to adjust things? So just, again, those check-ins are so huge, especially when remote, just to be able to ask those questions about workload itself, as well as the nuts and bolts of the work being done.
And I'm making an assumption here, so I'm going to check my assumptions. I'm guessing those are more of a private conversation with somebody when you're sensing that they are overloaded, because sometimes people feel, like they're not supposed to show that they're overloaded. Or have you figured out a way to make it comfortable for people to talk about that as a group?
We normalize it in our team check-ins. There are times where we might have to have conversations, especially if we're not, where we try to be explicit about, like, here are the outputs. Like, we should see artifacts or even meeting invites or emails. Like, if we're not quite sensing that there's the traffic or the output that we expected, and sometimes people might explicitly meet a deliverable or a deadline and they don't communicate that up front, that might require a personal conversation just to check in and provide that feedback of, this is what I was expecting. I didn't quite see it. Is there something we need to discuss?
Wonderful. Okay, so you've even normalized as a group, everybody's got capacity, and we actually work better when we work within our capacity and aren't constantly stretched beyond our capacity.
Right.
Although episodic work episodic overwork happens. We're just trying to avoid chronic overwork. So wonderful, great. And again, we'll come back to this, but Anna is a great example of where she's lived this in her personal life. And I think that all those experiences you've had of trying to be attentive to your own workflow has probably helped you become really smart as a team leader around workflow. Wonderful, wonderful. Just keeping an eye on the clock. Again, all of these topics were things that we kind of talked about at the summit. I was really excited that Third Path is making a commitment to really understand how work-life integration can be an everybody issue. And so we really have a number of people in our community who are experts around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And one of them happens to be Rashi. So I asked Rashi if she would join us and talk a little bit about a big, obvious theme that happened at the summit was to see how much these two issues, flexibility, hybrid work, go hand in hand, and we can really promote our DEI and B goals by also supporting hybrid and remote workplaces. What are you seeing, Rashi? Tell us a little bit about your expertise in this area.
So I worked at Third Path for a while, and I always felt like, working there, I was a remote employee. I was and still am a mom. So having the option of hybrid work is obviously more inclusive for women, stay-at-home parents. So I love that Jessica set up our workplace that way, because there's women and men who wouldn't have been able to work because we were primary caregivers for our children. But we had this ability to work. So I appreciate Jessica for that. And then I went on to get full-time work, and I do work at a DEI firm now. And it's very much the same way there. The company is based in Boston, but we are, we like to call ourselves a global team because we have one person from Canada, but most of us are from the United States. And we wouldn't have all been able to work there if it wasn't for remote and hybrid work. So just having the ability, there's, cross-functional team members. We all live from different parts of the country. So we, bring a little bit of a different perspective to what we're doing. Men, both men and women. We did just hire someone who was a returner to work. She has a returnship because she had a small child, and now she feels like I can come back to work. And I don't think she would have been able to do that without hybrid work, without remote work. So it's been great so far. And we see it every day. We have participants who participate in our programs. We have deaf participants who we're able to include because even the classes are online. So using closed captioning, using, interpreters, sign language, we were able to bring him into the program, and it might have been harder in person. And it was hard to do online even, but, that's where, my job comes in, is developing or bringing on digital platforms that can help us be inclusive to our participants and also to our employees. So, things where we have Zoom calls twice a week, and that's really how we stay in touch with each other as a team. Sharon might appreciate for onboarding, it was every day Zoom call. So we all felt like we were together every day. We use Slack to keep us, all connected all day long. It's easy to chat. So they have really developed, a great hybrid workplace, for us, and then for our participants to be involved too. Then there's people that also our programs are geared towards minorities, people of color. So just having the ability to, log on, take a class, they might not, some people might not have been able to do it otherwise. So it's different income levels, it's different, different areas of the country, different time zones, and all different kinds of people. So
we can really expand our audiences because of the technology,
Mhm.
expand who we're reaching out to, expand the ways that they can participate that meets their needs. And so this change in how we do our work, where we can include hybrid and remote work, really goes hand in hand with growing a more inclusive workplace. I want to give an example, Rashi. You might have heard it, and you can go back to our website and listen to previous webinars. But we had one of our board members, Tanya Horton, speaking about how she has done onboarding. And interestingly, one of the ideas is you want to kind of use onboarding to reinforce your culture. And one of the very important elements of their culture is diversity, equity, and inclusion. So they've actually created a diversity, equity, inclusion coursework that is part of the onboarding experience. So the cohort that comes in actually is getting onboarded about the organization, but also getting some basic information and important information about what is DEI and why is that so important to our organization. So they've really blended their goal of DEI with their onboarding experience. To me, that's just one more great example of how we can really use our ways to meld these two important issues. So I just think there's a lot for us to gain and learn around this. That's exciting. Well, great. Where we're going to go is talk a little bit about how some of our experiences have helped us get smarter about these things. Rashi, thank you for that shout out. Absolutely. I would argue that Third Path has always been trying to be an organization that lets people bring their whole selves to work. And the only thing that Rashi will laugh at when I say this is because we want dads to be able to flex their jobs just like moms. and that's an interesting thing about remote work. What I heard over and over again from the pandemic, and I'm wondering if any of my guests have a comment on this particular issue before I take us in a new direction. What I heard over the pandemic was because it became normative to be able to flex to meet some family responsibilities, and because people were able to do it in a hybrid approach or a remote approach, there was more men flexing to be involved with family responsibilities. Now, there were also family systems where that wasn't happening. But what we did hear about was the idea that it became normal for flex to happen, normal for remote work to happen, or hybrid work to happen. It opened the door for it to not be seen as a women's issue to flex for family responsibilities, but instead an everybody issue to be able to do that. Have any of you seen evidence of that in your organizations or in other ways in your communities?
I think this is an and, right? So I think what's interesting is it combines with the social conversation around gender and gender fluidity, right? Because there aren't dads in every family. There aren't moms in every family. There aren't even dads or moms in every family, right? So I think the broadening around what a family looks like is combined with how does a family sort of manage a family? And that's been really beautiful to see that shift. And I will say it is still a women's issue. So what I always worry about is calling it only a family issue negates that women are still underpaid, women are still holding predominant family role, right? So that it's both. I think thinking about it as a both and is really important.
Well articulated, Sharon. Thank you so much. Anybody else want to add a quick thought about how does remote work change things for a more expansive approach to family and inclusive approach to family? Anybody have a thought?
I think I don't know that I saw any shifts or changes in my small world, but what I saw was the vulnerability aspect of it for both men and women who maybe before thought that it was taboo or was a topic that you just needed to manage and not try and bring that to work. And I think it is much more accepted to be a whole person at work and talk about what else is going on and what challenges that might pose. So I think the problem solving around that has improved in my world.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, great. So what I want to do next is, starting with Anna, I know that I'm seeing a pattern in the third path community. And I'm seeing a pattern in the larger world. I am seeing that people who've experimented with these ideas around hybrid work, around thinking about what's the right amount of work, and they've done this because they have personally been trying to follow an integrated path. They are bringing knowledge, expertise, role modeling to their organization that is really helpful as we imagine and embrace a successful hybrid workplace. So their experiences, I'm arguing, end up being really helpful for all organizations as we continue to get smarter about these issues. I'll put one other thing out there. I think the opposite is true, too. People who, before the pandemic, worked on-site, never experimented with these issues, have become, they're the ones who are most likely to go back to the old ways because it's what was comfortable for them. And so we have this positive push towards successful hybrid and a pull away from it from people who are less experienced previously with these ideas. So I wanted to see, in your journey, Anna, how can you see that because you were committed to these ideas of thinking about remote work as an option, hybrid work as an option, thinking about boundary setting, what's the right amount of work as an option, as a part of your life all the way through, how has that helped you and how is that helping your organization be more successful about hybrid work today?
I think personally, I have a level of confidence that allows me to speak up and not just react. We feel the tension every day in my organization of on-site, hybrid, remote, and that tension is some people wanting to be fully on-site, some people wanting to be fully remote, and really the answer is somewhere in between. And I think that there's just there's smarter conversations that are happening around that. And I certainly, feel like there are voices that are important and I can contribute to that conversation.
I love that word, confidence. So you have viscerally experienced, hey, I can make this work. I can see some benefits of doing this. And that helps you be centered in the conversation and be able to contribute these ideas to the conversation because you've seen it work for yourself. And for many, many years, you've seen it work for yourself. Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. Great example. Sharon, any thoughts come to mind about how your personal journey has helped shape you to be a resource to your organization as they're wrestling with these issues?
Yeah, I would say that, so I'm one of the first hybrid, predominantly remote senior leaders in my organization. And so what that means is, and this is not anyone's fault, but it feels like my boundaries are constantly pushed on because they're abnormal, right? They're abnormal for the system. And so for me, I feel like my work here is to role model and actively talk about, you will feel othered, like expect to feel othered because this isn't yet normalized. And so be really clear about which boundaries are permeable, which boundaries aren't, and communicate them and expect the system to push on all of them, right? So I think what happens for a lot of people in particular, we're a predominantly female-based organization. I think women tend to be more accommodating. We're taught to be more accommodating, right? So the minute a boundary gets pushed on, it's like, okay, I'll change, I'll accommodate. And so really sort of pushing through that discomfort is super important. And I feel that Anna said she feels that tension every day. I totally get that. I feel that tension every day.
I love your words around being othered. I think that people who have been committed to an integrated life bump up against that quite often of what kind of like, here's what maybe even what the ideal employee is supposed to look like, and you're supposed to just put work first, and you're supposed to say yes, and without ever questioning. And so what you've been doing your entire careers is saying, well, tell me more. Let me figure out how to do that, and what else is on my plate. How do we think about this whole work plate that I've been given, and make some good choices there. So really a great example of what it's like to role model in a really honest way, Sharon. I like that. Curious, and before I ask Rashi the same question, have you tricked, and you might not have an answer to this, have you learned any tricks about what helps you stay centered around your boundaries? Is there a person? Is there a process? Is there something that helps you stay more centered?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think like holding boundaries will be on my tombstone. This is like my work to do, right? I feel like the universe has put me in this role for this work to do. I started working with a somatic coach, and that has been life-changing around like, how do I physically get centered? How do I hold my body in a centered way? How do I hold my body when I say no? So you may have noticed I tend to hold my arms out when I'm saying no. That does not send the signal of no, right? That sends a signal of yes. So really like helping my body register the boundary before my brain and mouth catch up.
Our bodies do give us good information if we slow down to pay attention to it. I could tell a little side story here, but I'll skip it. Wonderful. Thank you. I love that. Wonderful. So Rashi, you too, here we are, goals of creating a world where it's very inclusive, where people can feel like they can bring their true selves to work, their whole selves to work. How has your journey helped you shape your organization? How's your personal journey on these issues?
We are coming to a place where some people are coming into the office. I'm actually going to Boston on Monday for an in-person meeting. So there is starting to become this, little bit of a tussle. But they know they hired me from New Jersey. I'm here, and that I've been a remote employee for a long time. And I think they know that's not going to change. That's just part of who I am. I've been this person for a long time, and they know my kids come first, and I'm very open about that. But I've also been really intentional and purposely keeping in touch with each member on the team, volunteering for cross-functional work, staying in touch on Slack, staying, and respond to emails like fairly quickly. So I'm very intentional about connection. And, I've learned that through my remote work journey. We have, employees, colleagues who don't answer and they disappear. And I feel like that, they're not asking us to work more hours or overwork. But it's also, it's better not to disappear.
Well, no, you're hitting the nail on the head of exactly where I want to go next. But sorry, I interrupted you. Might be one thing you wanted to say.
No, and they still do respect boundaries, though, of, and I've, again, give Jessica another shout out of planning quiet work, planning time for meetings. And I still keep that practice where, this is when I can have meetings. This is when I need my own time. And they're very, very respectful of that. And that helps me to get more work done.
Yeah. Good. You learned what Rashi's talking about is that there are actually some work-life integration skills we can all learn. And when you learn them, it helps us do our jobs better. In fact, we'll be launching an overwhelm mitigation group this spring where we teach people these work-life integration skills. So contact us if you want to learn more about our OMG, overwhelm mitigation groups. Well, great. What Rashi was also getting at is that last question I wanted to talk about, the importance of creating connection in hybrid and remote workplaces. Because I think that is at the root of people's fears. I'm going to take a stab at a thought, and I'm curious if you guys agree. We took it for granted. You just walked into a physical workspace Monday through Friday, and so you didn't have to be intentional, like Sharon was talking about, around connection, because you just showed up every day, Monday through Friday, for the most part. And that without having to think about it, you bumped into people. And so for those people who are comfortable and used to always work that way, they're afraid that's being taken away from them. They don't feel the same connection. I've heard some people say, hybrid's going to ruin our culture. Or I've heard people say, my best friends were some of those people I worked with on site when I first started working. And so like this belief that somehow you can't create those deep connections in a hybrid approach, or that you're going to destroy the culture because people don't get connected. I think it's a big fear that is out there. And I'm wondering what you guys have learned around, one, how to push back and help people move past that fear, and or tips you've learned that really have helped you create connection in your workplaces. Sharon, I know you've mentioned some, so I'll repeat a couple that you said and then get it back to you and see if you want to add a couple more. I loved focus on relationships before tasks. You can tell us more about that if you wanted to. Be intentional. And then I also heard Anna talk about, understand each individual. So these are just some things that have been brought up before. Sharon, do you want to take a stab at ways you've learned to either push back at some of the old thinking or introduce some new thinking around connection?
Yeah. So culture is like my bag. That's what I spend most of my time thinking about, talking about. And if your culture hinged on people being in person, you're in bad shape. Like that's rough. That's a bad place for your organization to be in. And you are likely not looking at the insidious side of that, because I'll tell you what doesn't happen in a remote and hybrid culture is gossip and like some of the real hard things that are culture breaking down in terms of sort of the negative side. So I think that's one thing. You've got like a false sense of security if you think bringing people in is what's making your culture. So being very intentional about your culture. One thing that me and the CEO talk a lot about is you're always working on your culture, whether you are doing it intentionally or not is the question. And so what's the culture you want to build? And then what are the mechanisms you're using? One thing that I will say, I don't know that a lot of organizations are doing super well is how to develop your talent in a remote and hybrid work environment. So this is where I think Rashi can talk about from a digital perspective, there's lots of tools that can help you really investing in like your skills, AI, and those types of things, posting special projects like you would post a job, right? Like how to level that playing field. I don't know that there's been a ton of organizations that have cracked that nugget. But I think as a leader, you can do it. I make sure that I have development conversations with my people monthly, and we actually together update their resume after their performance reviews. So I think, really helping to keep people's desires and career advancements at mind is an important intentionality that is important for culture.
Yeah. And what about, have you wrestled with maybe some managers who are straying from this vision of hybrid as successful, and what happens when you have some managers going in one direction different than the direction the culture is trying to be set? Have you learned any lessons around how to kind of get the group reinforcing culture in the same way?
Yeah, this is where it's funny. Going to actually more tactical things is really your friend here, right? So what is actually the job requirements? And then sort of stacking that up against other jobs that require the same things that are able to do it remote. I think sort of taking personal preference off the table is super important, particularly when you're talking about all the way down to the management level. If it's an organizational commitment, then you sort of need to say, these are the expectations and this is the bar you need to meet in order to justify that it has to be a fully in-person role versus the other way around. So I think really creating process around that is super important.
Great. Really zeroing in on the work, not the personal preference. Wonderful. And helping people get smart about that. Wonderful. All right. So we're talking about culture and helping strengthen culture and connection in hybrid workplaces. Anna, you might have some thoughts that you want to share that you've learned around methods maybe at the micro level, between people, between teams. What are your thoughts?
I will admit I'm very much a student of this right now. My organization actually just recently got results from our latest employee survey, and one of the areas we did not do very well in is a response to a question of the sorts of, I feel connected at work. And so I think our automatic response has always been, well, let's have more in-person events. Like that's going to solve for connection. And I think we're now realizing that's not, I mean, that might be part of a solution, but that is not the solution. And so we're just starting on the journey of understanding what does connection mean. So I think back to that culture question of what should that look like? And have we articulated that very well? And then how does that marry up with employees' expectations and what their desire for connection is? So we're on a journey for sure. And I think that that's my big learning is that we may not know what the answer is. And I think kind of going back to culture is probably a really great place to start.
Yeah. Well, in a little bit, I will share one thing that Third Path has learned. Maybe it's too obvious, but let me start by asking Rashi, have you guys, again, where did we start this podcast? We said, we're all learning. Nobody has all the answers right now, but we are innovators, and we are saying hybrid brings so many benefits. And so we are going to keep on innovating. And by the time we get to Summit 2025, we're going to know a heck of a lot more that we can share amongst our community so we can all get smarter. And the fact that you're asking those questions, Anna, learning that you need to find out some more answers, that there is already a really good answer, right? Find out where you need to improve. Get some more information so you can make the improvement. That's a great step towards making some change. Rashi, have you been learning things around building culture and tactics that have worked well in your organization with people or teams?
So my organization was all in person before the pandemic, and they were really intentional about everybody going online. I don't think they were expecting everyone to stay online, but they did. They were very just like, okay, what's the strategy? How are we going to go online? I guess we had a little bit of a head start. One of our board members is Sadal Neely. She's a Harvard law school Harvard professor who wrote a book about remote employees and how to keep people connected. So they had an expert to lean on. So that was part of the learning. But the other thing I feel like my CEO does well is he really normalizes bringing your whole self to work. So he talks about whatever is going on in his personal life that might be hindering work or helping work. And then he encourages us to bring our whole selves to work. Like if I have to go pick up my daughter from school, I just say, I have to go pick up my daughter from school. I'm going to not be here for 15 minutes. So that's okay and very normal. But of course, they're still expecting us to get projects done, expecting us to get work done. So, like they're giving and they expect us to give too. So but having that
great
tone,
example.
Yeah, the tone from the top down really does help.
Yeah. And the tone of showing the honesty, the authenticness of living a whole life. And that is certainly something I know, Rashi, you saw us do at Third Path, and that was the tip I was going to get. It's like, I think actually it's interesting by finding simple processes for leaders to show their whole selves in an authentic way and model that. Not only does it allow people to see that they can bring their whole selves, I think it brings trust and connection to the workplace. And that's what we are talking about. We're talking about you want to build connection and authenticity. And so that leader modeling a whole person who some days, some weeks has some challenges, I think builds a lot of trust in groups, in organizations. So Rashi, that was really good to hear that your organization has done that. That's certainly something Third Path has done, and we've been very intentional around how we can make that happen. And depending on our time, I might share an example of that. Wonderful. All right, so the big message as you're listening in today, there's no way we've got it all figured out about how to do hybrid and remote excellently yet, but we have people in our community who can help us get smarter about it, and maybe even just notice that there's something that we need to learn as an organization and then ask some more questions. Because I really think the future is hybrid. The future is remote. And there might be some organizations that will go back to fully on-site, and they're going to be in trouble in time because this really is the opportunity. Does it mean that everybody wants to work in the same way? Do some people prefer to work on-site? These are all things we have to figure out because there's going to be differences in how people want to work. But I think organizations that take full advantage of the opportunity of hybrid and remote are going to be really way ahead of the learning curve as time goes on. So what we're going to be doing next is getting a chance to talk to our experts in a more Q&A kind of way. So let me put up a couple more things. So just a little reminder that if you go to our website, you'll find lots of free resources. I put this one up in particular. It's called Transformative Flex. It's the idea that when you're trying to think about how to follow an integrated approach, you need to think about where and when you're working, but also how much you're working. And it's a great little 2-pager that helps you explain these concepts and show, like you've heard today, when we get committed to these ideas, we can actually help make transformation happen in our organizations. So don't forget, we've got lots of great free resources on our website. All right, what's happening next? We're going to be having a town hall type discussion today. And what it means is that we really want these to be an opportunity for you to ask questions and hear some other people's good thinking on the topics that have been raised today. Depending on how many people are here today, we will either work in small groups on topics or just open it up for question and answer. Whichever way, this part of the webinar won't be recorded. All right, so that was really fun. I really am enjoying these town hall experiences. It's an opportunity for us to talk a little bit more in depth about some of these important issues that have been raised today. We had a great conversation about, there's many more organizations that are expecting people to come in, for example, 2 days a week. And what do you do when that makes people feel disgruntled? And there was a really powerful way to turn that on its head and help people get smart about, well, what's the opportunity here? Can we turn those 2 days into an experience where we're really making the most of our on-site experience to build connection, meet somebody for coffee, do collaborative work, have those conversations that are a little bit harder to have that you in a remote way. So it's kind of like turning it on its head and creating an important why for your employees who are being asked to come in 2 days a week. Interestingly, it's the same as what you need to do in workplaces where it's more random, where people come into the office. You need to help them find connection too. So we're all learning. We're going to get smarter. We're going to build these better hybrid workplaces. It's exciting to see where it'll take us. So I just want to remind you, if you enjoyed today's discussion, you can continue the conversation by joining our Trailblazers Facebook group or following us on social media or coming back next month on the second Thursday of every month for our Thursdays with Third Path event. And don't forget, we are a wonderful nonprofit, and we've been successful in building our community of role models and change agents. And if you're excited about our work, please help us continue to do this and provide these free resources, like our Thursdays with Third Path podcast, by making a small monthly or annual donation on our website. So I just want to give our guests a chance to have the last word. One important piece of advice they might have for people listening in today. I'll probably start with Sharon, then Anna, then Rashi. What's one last word of advice you have for the topic today, Sharon?
I love the use of the word learning because I agree. I think we're all learning. I know that I am constantly reassessing what's working for me. Sometimes what's working on Tuesday is like actively getting in my way on Wednesday. So I encourage people to not give up hope. I like to say, be like water, right? Take the path of least resistance. So if you feel like you're hitting a boulder constantly, it's time to look at how do you flow around it.
Yeah, wonderful. And I loved your point about paying attention to what your body is telling you. because we can learn a lot as opposed to just grinding through it. So wonderful. Anna, any last words of advice?
I think the word for me today is definitely connection. And I think that I would emphasize the importance of that. And just thinking about that, what we talked about in the Q&A, I think making the connection and helping your teams make the connection for what's going on in work, with their why and with the organization's why is really critical to maintaining that connection.
Wonderful. And Rashi, it was really fun to hear that you've gone from a workplace like Third Path that supported you to live a whole life to find another place where the leadership is really modeling this as well and being vulnerable and authentic. It gives me hope about what the future workplaces are going to look like. Any last words of advice for you, Rashi?
That's the exact word I was going to use, was hope, because I learned so many skills working at Third Path. And then I had to go back and get full-time work. So I went to go look for full-time work, and I was thinking, I'm just never going to find a place that's so supportive of remote work. But I did. So there is hope for everybody to find places that are supportive. But Jessica, I really think using what I've learned from Third Path and actually teaching it to my colleagues has made our remote work so much more successful. There's other people now who are blocking off time on their calendars, for intentional work. There's, I'm only doing meetings at this time. I'm bringing my whole self to work. A lot of these are Third Path principles, and they can be applied in workplaces, and people actually appreciate them. It makes everyone feel better and everyone feel more connected.
Thank you, Rashi. That's really, really great. And if you're excited about what Rashi's talking about, we will be launching a new group of OMG classes and cohorts this spring and summer. So look into that too. Hey, thank you, everybody. Really wonderful. Thank you for your expertise. Thank you for helping us create the workplace that will really make a difference for the next generation. Thanks a bunch.